are you listening to? Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.
All right, welcome to another episode of Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. We will be joined this evening by Marlo Oaks, the state treasurer. And I know just from the sound of that...
we lost people right there.
I know, I was going to say, from the sound of that, you can tell that this is going to be a fascinating discussion. But actually, it will be. It will be.
Okay, and the scariest stuff,
yes.
Some of the crazy
stuff, right? in a lot of different ways. And so we... are really excited because Marlo's somebody Kim and I have been having conversations with, Kim for a much longer period than I, and I just recently on some of the ESG stuff going on, and we had a discussion during the session with Cheryl Acton about how she was attempting to address some ESG threats on the consumer level.
Remind us again what ESG stands for.
Energy, social and governance. So control of the type of energy that you use, kind of your social score has to do usually with wokeness criteria, and governance that also is the same. Like if you have an organization, a business, what does that leadership look like? What boxes do your people in the leadership capacity of that organization, what boxes do they check? Rather than looking at you deciding from purely not just economic, but from the perspective of merit.
Well, it's definitely can be bias-driven and discriminatory practice.
Exactly. Very discriminatory, right? So illegal under federal law, frankly. And so if that, what concerns me, I think there are ways to maybe do that right by being open to all candidates, as opposed to saying we have to have this because it's being required by some outside entity for some reason. But yeah, so Marlo has a different approach to that, or some other aspects of ESG that are concerning that he's looking at. And so he'll tell us some about that.
So Marlo Oaks, if you haven't heard his name a lot yet, just became our state treasurer through a special election. The former treasurer was poached to do something in the private sector.
Yeah, Utah Housing Corporation.
And so there was a special election, which I got to participate in. And the members of the state central committee, which is about 100 elected Republican officers from all over the state. And so that's one of the duties of this governing body of the party, is we came together to replace the outgoing treasurer, and we had a great field of candidates, and Marlo Oaks won that special election. And so you're kind of new at that job, but definitely not new to the duties of the job. And so what I think is curious that people might want to know, or maybe just the nerdy part of my brain, but why is a state treasurer first of all, why is it an elected office, and then why is it a partisan office? Like why do we care if the treasurer is a Republican or not?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, by the way, for inviting me to be with you both. It's great to be here, and I'm always excited when somebody wants to talk about the treasurer's office. So that always gets me excited. I'm happy to talk to anybody about it, frankly. I think it's, to me, the importance of it being partisan has really come into full focus in the last few months that I've been in office. And it really relates to ESG, frankly. But I used to tell people, well, do you want a socialist managing your money, right? So
that's a reasonable question.
It really is, because at the end of the day, what the treasurer does, it is all about money. But as I told people on the campaign trail, it's not necessarily an accounting position, because an accountant tells you what happened to your money in the past. An investment manager tells you what to do with your money in the future, or how to invest your money. And so the treasurer's office really is an investment role. And we have two parts of that investment role. One is the sell side, which is investment banking. That's when the state needs to borrow money from investors. We go through investment banks. So that's the sell side. The opposite of that is the buy side. and that's managing money. So the managers who are buying the state's debt are the investment managers. Now, in the Treasurer's office, we have about $27 billion that we manage directly for over 750 municipal entities across the state. So those two components are probably the highest profile, most important parts of the job. I shouldn't say highest profile, but certainly the most impactful potentially for the state. And then, of course, I get involved in financial literacy and then unclaimed property. So when people have money that they've lost track of or maybe left possessions in a safe deposit box, that comes to the Treasurer's office, unclaimed property. But really where this has become very important on a partisan level is in the ESG realm, and that's E stands for environmental, social, and governance. And I actually came across the Democratic Treasurers Association. Okay, so the Democratic Treasurers Association, we all talk about how important the 2022 elections will be in terms of Congress, right, and taking back control of the House. But listen to this. State treasurers have the power to exert force nationally because they oversee trillions of dollars and have a direct line to Wall Street, Main Street, and into corporate boardrooms. State treasurers' power will endure no matter which party controls Congress and the White House. No matter what happens in November, they will have the ability to ensure that climate risk is addressed, racial inequality and gender bias is confronted, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the power that they see in the treasurer's office. And why is that? Because at the end of the day, money is what is driving the ESG agenda. And the reason that it is because the large investors, so when you and I invest money, right, in our retirement accounts, we might put away money in a 401k. That ultimately goes to an investment manager who decides, what stocks to own and the different financial instruments to own on our behalf. That manager is voting our shares, because when we own part of a corporation, we own part of that company. And the policies of that company go before the shareholders to vote on. And so it's a little bit like a democratic process, but it's a little bit different. In our democracy, one person equals one vote. In the corporation, $1 equals one vote, okay? And so unlike George Soros, who's using his own $10 billion of money, these investment managers are using our money to vote these proxies. So the best example is Larry Fink. Okay, Larry Fink is the CEO of Blackrock. Blackrock is a $10 trillion asset manager, the largest in the world.
Wow.
And they are using that power to vote our money against our values. And that's what makes this so sinister.
Okay.
So yes.
Can you, in case we have people listening that aren't up to speed on BlackRock, what is frightening about that?
So BlackRock, so they have used their powers. Let me just give you a little quote from Larry Fink. Okay, so Larry Fink was talking to a group at a conference back in 2017. And he said, quote, "You have to force behaviors. And at BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors."
Wow.
That's not communist socialist at all.
No, ESG is fundamentally about using economic force to drive political agendas. That's how I summarize it for people. And what are those political agendas? Well, in the United States, when the Biden administration got into power, what was the first thing they did? They started going after the fossil fuel industry, right? So what that looks like is cutting off the money to an unfavored industry. right? The fossil fuel industry, or it might be the firearms industry, or whatever it is. So they've had a multi-pronged strategy. This administration has had a multi-pronged strategy to go after fossil fuel companies. So Biden goes out and gets John Kerry to become his, I'm not sure what his name is, the czar of something, but he's going around to the banks, right? And telling banks not to lend money to the fossil fuel industry. And then you have the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, the MSRB, which is the market where the municipal market where money, municipalities like the state of Utah and other states, they go through and borrow money from investors. All of these different agencies, like the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, even the Federal Reserve, have all declared a fealty to this idea that money should not go to the fossil fuel industry. And institutional investors like Blackrock are doing exactly the same thing. It is incredible the amount of collusion, whether it's on purpose or not, but right. I mean, all of these forces are sort of coming together to try and force a behavior, which is what BlackRock said.
So tell me, the state of Utah, are our retirement funds for our state workers doing this against our better interests? Yeah. How are our funds being used? Is there an audit or any control over that?
That's a great question. I probably can't say anything right now about that. I am looking into that.
Okay.
I can tell you out of the Treasurer's office, we have looked very closely at how we are invested, and we are avoiding companies that are actively engaging in boycotts and things of that nature. We came out and signed a letter with other states basically saying that we will perform an enhanced due diligence process when we're hiring financial services firms to make sure that they aren't trying to boycott different industries that are out of favor. I mean, fundamentally, this is completely anti-American. If you think of our American system, the American system really has two parents: capitalism and democracy. And ESG is trying to castrate capitalism and neuter democracy.
Yeah.
And I know that's kind of strong, but at the end of the day, they're really trying to force us into a socialist kind of system where the elite, or those that have the most money, determine our political agenda and how it's resolved. ESG goes around the legislative process. And why is that? Because they could not get their legislative agenda through the legislature, like the Green New Deal, right? Or any number of these other items that they're trying to push through the corporate boardroom. And they found that the corporate boardroom is much easier to manipulate or access than is the legislative process.
So we kind of see that frequently from the left, that they so many of our nation's institutions have been so thoroughly corrupted. And while we're not watching, or we're watching, this thing over here comes the leftist agenda around back, and we're not watching. And Marlo, I can promise you, not a lot of regular voters are thinking about the Treasurer's office in this way. I think of the Treasurer's office as maintaining our AAA bond rating and doing such a great job on actually managing our funds and keeping our retirement fund healthy and having that accountability. And I think in the last several years, there has been an initiative to help people find lost funds.
Yes. I got a text a couple weeks ago for my lost funds.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
did too.
yeah, there were some.
Yep.
It was my mother. She said, "I think your husband has a couple $100."
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
So those are the things like regular voters may or may not even
Right.
know about or be paying attention to.
Right.
But holy cow, this is the most frightening thing to me, honestly.
Oh,
Where
absolutely.
it's not the sexy race. It is not the high profile race. It's not one that's at the top of people's minds. And so we want to help with that. We want to make sure that we get the word out that this really matters. Tell
And
me,
Marlo's running right now.
Right.
Let's point
Yes.
that out.
yes,
right?
and because Marlo came in on a special session, then now he has to kind of stand for the next,
Yes.
election now in a regular cycle. But so, okay, I have two questions for you. Number one is there a similar impact and urgency, criticality at the county treasurer level?
Not as much, because typically what the county treasurers, where they're investing their money is at the state level in the public treasurer's investment fund.
Okay.
And so that's where they have their money. And so so I would say probably not the same level. But where it is impacting people is in their retirement portfolios. And this is where everyone who's listening to this should become aware of or find out, is the manager that is overseeing your retirement portfolio, are they using ESG criteria to invest your portfolio? Because at the end of the day, that's adding a layer of politics to your portfolio that is likely to be detrimental to the performance of your portfolio.
Yeah.
And most people don't want that.
Or just basically using your money to fund things you don't believe in, or that ultimately, as you say,
That's
will do
right.
harm.
That's right.
Okay, so what is your perception of the national movement on this? So again, sometimes the Democrats, sometimes the left can be far more organized on these things. You've probably had some National Association of State Treasurers, and what's going on there as you work with other treasurers from other states?
Ah, boy. It is interesting. I was there last week in Washington, D.C. with other state treasurers. And as you can imagine, this is a hot topic that is partisan. And so therefore, they don't talk about it at the National Association of State Treasurers. And I actually talked to the leadership there, and I just said that we're not going to be talking about ESG, I assume. And they said, no, it's too partisan. So, but, I do think that this is an issue that, frankly, I think crosses party lines.
Yeah, it should.
That unless yes, it absolutely should,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, this threatens our American systems. Our parents are the capitalism, the capital markets, and the democracy are both threatened by ESG. And so any American, I don't care what party you're associated with, you should be concerned about this, and you should not want it if you care about the American system. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think we're finding this in issue after issue, that things that we have believed as a country and as a people, suddenly we don't anymore. And it then becomes partisan when this isn't partisan. This should not be partisan.
Right.
The way we've always done things, and it always comes back basically to the Constitution, right? For some reason, the Constitution itself is partisan. And we had a bit of a discussion on free
Yeah.
speech with regard to this issue
We do
a week
keep
ago.
Oh,
we
my
do
goodness.
keep coming back to not understanding why the left takes positions that are ultimately harmful to them
Yes.
as well,
Yeah.
and us as a country, and is very antithetical to our
Right.
our values.
And
But-
it should not be a
Yes.
divide along party lines. It should be the radicals versus the rest of America, because the rest of
Right.
America does not want this for the most part. I would
Correct.
think anybody who actually is aware of what it does. I think Fosmu, our producer, has a comment or a question he'd like to add.
Yeah, so my question for you, Marlo, is what should and what is happening at the state legislature level to address this threat of ESG?
Well, it is very complicated. The reason that it's complicated is because it's not clear that there is a very easy legislative fix here, because ESG goes around the legislative process. And so one of the keys, I think, is to protect the fiduciary standard in the state and in our country, right? That's one of the things that the first thing that really alerted me to what was going on was the Department of Labor rule that they want to comment on to allow ESG as a default option in a retirement plan. And what that means essentially is that if I'm a company and I'm sponsoring a 401k or retirement plan, and I have a safe harbor to put an ESG fund as a default option, that's where a lot of money will end up going, because it's the default option and people just don't choose, right? And so it fundamentally would politicize the fiduciary standard, whereas today's fiduciary standard says, as a fiduciary, my decisions have to be for the sole financial benefit of the beneficiaries, right? Yeah. If I allow ESG, then suddenly it's whatever politics I deem that I want to push in my corporation. I have a safe harbor on that, and people can't sue me because I'm just pursuing ESG. It's very dangerous. And so coming back to the legislative fix, part of it is to, and I think the really the core of this is to strengthen the fiduciary standards around which our retirement systems have to operate, and to ensure that they are doing are making decisions that are in the best interest of the beneficiaries. And by the way, I think Utah Retirement Systems does a great job in that. The thing that I'm looking at very closely is the proxy voting, because that's where kind of the rubber hits the road when it comes to pushing an agenda through a corporation. It's through that vote. And so we need to take a very close look at that. But there's no silver bullet, I would say.
Yeah. So we did have a bill during the session, and I guess that bill started late, Representative Acton, to deal with ESG. But I wonder about, from where you sit, having that standard intact, but for like the regular person, the regular consumer interacting with financial institutions, even just to have some disclosure, like some mandatory disclosure, and can we even define it well enough for, our institutions to disclose?
Well, let me say though, I think Marlo's point is a really good one, because if your focus is on fiduciary duty, then it becomes much simpler, I think, to define
and
when
an
you stray
standard
from,
and practice standard.
When you stray from that, for us it would be clearly identified. I think that many on the left would say, well, we're moving away, for instance, on the environmental standard. We're moving away from fossil fuels, so looking toward the future, it is even through the eyes of somebody who's responsible for the, economic growth of this fund or whatever, that we still are taking that into account because we think long term.
Right.
But the part that they're leaving out is it's these kinds of policies that are destroying really the most efficient form of energy that we have, and the necessary form in order for even green energy to operate, right? We need that base load power. They just...
Exactly. And the other, I think the Russian situation has really brought into sharp focus the inherent problems with ESG. Suddenly Europe went from, saying, oh, we're all about the Green New Deal, to saying, well, maybe fossil fuels aren't such a bad thing, and that firearms manufacturers, maybe we'll move that over to the asset column of ESG, because we actually want to defend ourselves if we're attacked, right? I mean, it's completely contradictory. So the problem with saying, oh, I'm going to take a long-term view, because that's the terminology that they use, that we're long-term investors, right, is that you will never be able to outline the infinite ways the future could go. Nobody would have predicted that, a year ago that we would be sitting here with Russia attacking Ukraine.
Right.
And what would that mean for the oil market or these other markets? So when you start putting yourself in the place of God to determine what is going to happen in the future, you are going to be wrong by definition. And so you have to keep a focus on allocating resources to their best and highest use today, not based on some future, outlook.
That's a really
That's going to
good
be wrong.
point. And I think that, when you talk about the Russia situation, I think always. So in my previous job, working for Senator Lee, I traveled around the state. I worked with a lot of people in rural communities, elected officials. And I always would say it seems that the further we get from the realities of our sustenance, the more liberal we have the luxury of becoming, right? And that's exactly right. War and the realities of war and facing the things that sustain life on a day-to-day, kind of level, it makes you conservative pretty quickly because conservatism is about reality, I think. So I really like that point. We don't know how the future will go as much as they would like, and they being the people who are pushing us toward these standards.
Well, and last night I was cold in my house, and I told my husband, as long as we have available heat, could we please use it? As long as it's an option. Sorry.
No, this is true. I do think, though, every time I turn up the heat in my house a little higher, I think, I don't know, in a few years, I might not be able to afford to do this with the way we're heading. Right?
As long as we can afford it and it's there.
Yeah.
Well, you can turn the thermostat on. So, Marlo.
Well, and that gets to another point that, when we start determining winners and losers, what happened in the 2008 financial crisis? We were determining winners and we were distorting the housing market, right, by forcing banks to lend to people that they would not have lent to, right? High risk. And so these sort of market distortions tend to create bubbles. Well, what are we seeing with oil prices? And we're seeing a huge bubble. And who does that hurt? It hurts the people that can least afford it, that supposedly the left cares about, but we know they don't, right? That's why the Republican Party has suddenly become the party of the working class in a lot of cases, because they see that this is really an elitist agenda to force behavior that ultimately distorts markets, leads to asset bubbles, and hurts a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, Marlo, we'll wrap it up. But are there any kind of last points that you would add to what we've been discussing tonight? What do the listeners need to be aware of? What do they need to be having conversations with their legislators about?
And let me throw in a quote for you real quick that from American Mind this morning. The right is the only political home for anyone who wants to live in reality. So I think that applies to your office. So, sorry to interrupt.
That's great. No, that's great. I would say from each individual's perspective, I would ask your money manager or whomever is managing your money, you need to find out, number one, are they using ESG, not just in your portfolio, but in the case of BlackRock, is their firm like BlackRock? If you have BlackRock in your portfolio, get out of it. And then find out if the firm that you are using, maybe it's Vanguard or Fidelity, whoever it is, that they not be using ESG with your money to vote your shares or the money that your shares represent. So that's very important, and that's something that you can do right now, because right now these investors are not hearing from people on the right, and so they feel like the only voice they're hearing is from the left, and it's pushing an extreme agenda. We've got to have a voice out there of the practical everyday American that says, you cannot do this with my money. This is not right, and I don't want any part of it. And I want you to pursue the best return that you can for my retirement.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And then I would just say, people need to know that we are working on this very hard, and it's not just here in Utah. That I am working with some of the best minds in this country. My background is very important for people to understand. I have an institutional investment management background. I'm the only state treasurer that I know of in the entire country that has that background. That is exactly what we're talking about here, is the institutional investment management world. It is driving ESG. And so I understand and have connections and trying to organize against this and figure out how do we push back. So I hope that gives people some level of comfort that we're not asleep at the switch, but we're very actively trying to mobilize against this very heinous movement.
Okay, where can people follow you?
Oh boy. That's a good question. The treasurer's office, so treasurer.utah.gov. And then, we've got Instagram and Facebook. But the treasurer's office, if you start there, that's a great place to start. You can see some of the letters that we've spearheaded across the country, some of them that we signed on to, and so forth.
Perfect. So I can tell, Marlo, you do not do your own social media for the treasurer's office, do you?
No, thankfully I've got help there.
But I do have to say, our first conversation when I first met you, this is what I think the bulk of our conversation was about, when that wasn't the intention, right? It was just an opportunity to get to know you. But we ended up spending a lot of time on this, and I have been very impressed with not only the level of knowledge on this issue that you bring to the table, but how quickly you are taking action to try to figure out solutions. And so will be.
And I really got into this position thinking that it would not be political.
I remember you saying that. You hate politics.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not into that's my wife's realm, right? And I supported her in that, and she loved it, and that was great. And now here I am, the state treasurer. It's like, and I feel like I was walking along in the forest and turned over a log, and I didn't find just little bugs. I found gremlins and monsters under that thing, and so I find myself in a very unusual situation, I would say, but I guess it fits really well with my background. So
we're grateful for that. We're
grateful
for your vision there and your observance.
Well, thank you.
Of all that. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
it's been great to be here. Thank you for your interest. I like I said, I love to talk to anybody about the treasurer's office. So, and happy to come back and talk more about this if that's of interest.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you
would
so
be
much.
great as things move along. We appreciate you coming on.
Thanks,
Marlo.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We need to post on our website information for how people can find out if they've got money out there.
Yeah, that's true.
That's owed to them. That's
true.
always kind of fun every couple of years to look that up and see.
Well, and you're right. Every couple of years, I'm surprised because I remember the treasurer's office a number of years ago under Dave Damshin.
Having that initiative to have people go ahead and look that up.
Yeah, so there were a lot of public service announcements and things, and I think many of us jumped on and found money. And here, a couple years later, I found some more.
Well, here's another place Utah leads, and so that was fantastic. But how scary! So I'm making some phone calls tomorrow.
That's right.
So I.
And really that this is being done with our own money in a way that we're not aware. Most of us are not paying attention to that. And most of us, frankly, wouldn't even know where to find the information. And I find myself as one of those.
Well, so a lot of our institutions are being weaponized against us.
They are.
And
I
we
think
fund
all of them are.
We fund higher education.
Yes.
It's used against us. There are elements of the criminal and justice system that we fund being used against people.
Well, and can I say, during this entire, and let me also say, I say that way too much, but during the entire pandemic, I noticed that the perspective of my friends varied depending on whether they worked, not exclusively, but to a great degree, whether they worked within some large institution where there was a message, an institution that they'd always trusted, and there was a very specific message, and most people within the institution got that message and went right along with it.
And that was the
without
only
much
frequently
critical thinking.
because of our media institutions. It was also the only only
Yes.
messages.
Unless you
they
were
got.
looking.
Yeah,
You're
unless you were
exactly
looking.
right.
So, but as Marlo noted, that that's largely in the public sector side, but we are now seeing the large corporate
Yes.
beast. Now,
And it's
now
a beast. This is not benign.
right?
Yeah.
And like you said too, they're not hearing from the right. Because frequently we don't always know this is going on.
We're not driving it.
Well,
When
how
you're-
many citizens do you think, like percentage-wise, how many voters in Utah know this? What he just presented about ESG scores.
Okay, I feel like we're pretty on it, right?
Yeah, but
I
we're
knew
just waking up
nothing-
to it, too.
I knew nothing about this aspect of it until I sat down to lunch with Marlo.
Yeah.
And even then, it took me some time to really wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
Like, how are they pushing this stuff, right? But it's the influence that comes with the dollars when you're managing these funds.
So I think let's definitely encourage our listeners to do a couple things. Vote Republican for treasurer's offices, because who knew? Absolutely. But get out, because sometimes that's one that's left blank, or they just voted because it's they've got the R behind
Well,
their
and
name.
you heard what he said.
Yeah.
What did Marlo say? The Democrat treasurers have taken a specific position on this,
Right.
and it is in support of weaponizing these institutions against your interests with your own money.
It's how to embed the Green New Deal in the administrative state.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that is fascism, right? It sounds like we have the federal government that is the one going into these organizations and institutions, private organizations and institutions, and pushing this.
That's right.
So this is truly collaboration, collusion, whatever you want to call it, between big government and big business.
That's right.
Well, they call it public-private partnership.
Well, some of this isn't even public-private partnerships. It's just government telling business what they ought to do. Now, you make a good point, though, Doran. Why would big business care? They probably care mainly because some money's coming their way on some public-private partnership deals.
Well, yeah.
right?
And so if your
Some-
agencies can tie grant monies, investment
Yeah,
monies,
that's true.
and standards of operations to their agenda, which is what parties do. But we've got the wrong agenda being
Yeah.
embedded across this country, and stemming from that wrong
and the voters,
party in the federal government.
The voters don't know it. I would say that most reasonable Democrat voters probably would not be in support of this, and especially if they really understood it. And I have said, I don't remember if I brought this up with Matt when we were talking about free speech, but there are questions. I think I did bring this one up. Questions that I think we need to start asking. And one had to do with defining your terms, right? But another one that I have started asking people is, you're going to have to explain to me what your end goal is. Because if the policy that you're proposing does not line up with what you claim your end goal is, then I know that's not really your end goal, because you're not an idiot. Right. And I think that is what okay, most of the time. And I think that is what's going on with this kind of thing too. I think you would have a lot of Democrat voters who would say, well, that sounds good. We want equity, right? Because these terms, again, are not well defined, and people don't understand what they mean. But then what is the end goal, or what does this ultimately lead to? You are going to have to draw that out for me so that I truly understand its impact on my life. And if you can't do that, then I don't think I should head down that road.
So we have a lot of useful idiots for the left on
I
both
know.
sides of the aisle, and
correct.
in all parties. And to me, it's just ultra disgusting when our people fall for it.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that Marlo gets it. And so please please engage on this race.
Yeah.
You've heard how important this is. So it's not the one you think about so much, but
No.
I do think that he has a Democrat opponent in the general election.
Okay.
And it's hard to raise money for those campaigns. So please, vote Republican for that treasurer's office, and to the extent that you can help,
Yeah.
help him out.
And
Put a
we
sign
should
in your
look-
yard.
Yeah, we'll take a peek at that at his campaign website and get that posted.
We'll throw
too.
that up. And then number 2, do what he said.
That's
go talk to your retirement, your investment brokers, whatever they are, and make sure that they're not investing in with ESG scores or into organizations that use
They
them.
use them. Yeah.
So that was very informative.
Yeah,
very
it was.
scary.
It was. And it was much more interesting than I think most of you would think.
Yeah,
the
so if you're still
treasurer's
with us.
discussion would be.
You're still with us.
So, we have some good guests and different things coming up soon. Yeah. We have we mentioned this last time that we have a discussion about party rating and kind of some of the things that are going on, and frankly things that are being pushed by people with R's next to their name, which is just unbelievable to me. Because if you truly believe in what the party stands for, you would never do this. So I think that should tell us a little something about those who are doing it. So that will be our next show.
Okay, so we need you to please subscribe. We have tons of viewership. We'd love your subscription. So
okay,
go wherever
every day
you hear.
someone's telling us.
Yeah, I have more
every
today.
Every single day.
Like,
yes.
wait. So,
anyway,
thank
you.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of our audience and for giving the input that you do so frequently in social media. But please subscribe and follow us. That's very, very helpful for getting these messages out and sharing with your neighbors. Thanks for joining Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.